At this point, I like to install the drives next, and we'll start by installing the CD-ROM drive or DVD drive up on top here. Then we'll install the floppy drive and hard drive as we work down the stack. Now, this particular case is a toolless design, and they use these brackets to install the drive. So what I need to do is to locate the brackets that came with the chassis. You need to basically snap them into the drive, like so. And like so. And with these brackets now installed, and they basically just sort of clip to the sides of the drive, I can now slide the drive into the front of the machine until it engages. At that point, the drive is physically installed. You know, to remove it, all you have to do is press on these latches and pull it forward. So that's really pretty easy. Other chassis might have you slide the drives in place and actually attach screws in these slots along the side of the drive, and you might have to do that on both sides. But in any case, this one is pretty easy. So that drive is installed. Next, I'll install the floppy drive. Now on that one, I've pre-affixed the brackets. These brackets also came with the chassis, and I've clipped them to the side of the drive. And I'm now going to slide the drive into the machine. Again, it locks into place. The floppy drive is now installed. And finally, I'm going to install the hard drive. Now, some machines have a removable hard drive cage. Other ones, you simply slide the drive in and screw it down. This one has a removable cage, which comes out sideways. So I simply remove this cage, and now I can install the drive into the cage and then slide the cage back into the machine. Now, to install the drive in the cage, you merely line it up like so. Line up the screw holes. Oops, I'm going to do it this way here. Line up the screw holes with the holes in the side of the cage and begin installing the screws. And it's going to end up like this. So I'll set it down. Now, different screw threads are used in different drives. You'll get an assortment of screws with your case. You want to make sure that you're using the right screws for the job. I believe it's these here. I'm going to do a little trial fitting here. Yep, that is the correct thread. Another issue when installing screws into a hard drive is you want to make sure that the screws are not too long. You'll see that sometimes there's not a lot of distance between where the screw goes into the drive and then the actual sealed chamber. And you don't want to be tightening the screw or use a longer screw where it actually tries to penetrate that chamber or press against the side of it. So you need to be careful with the screw length on the hard drives. These are perfect, so I'm going to begin tightening a couple of these screws down. And then turn the drive over, install the screws on the other side. Same way. Okay. Once the screws are tightened into the bracket, you can now slide the bracket back into the case. And then in this case, a final screw will secure the bracket to the case. Now I'm ready to cable the drives to the motherboard. Now I've installed one optical drive, in this case a DVD. I've installed a floppy drive and a hard drive. Now the floppy drive uses a cable like this. A lot of these cables will be, you'll note by having a little funny twist in the end. That's standard for floppy cables. And the end with the twist goes towards the drive. The other end will plug into the motherboard. The red stripe on the cable indicates the pin 1 orientation. In almost all cases, the pin 1 will be oriented towards the power connector on the drive. So in this example, from where the power connector is, I can see it's going to go like this. And the other end will plug directly into the motherboard. So that's going to be plugged in. Then for hard drives, I can use either the ribbon cable if it was a parallel ATA, or the smaller serial ATA cable if the drive is a serial ATA. Now I do happen to have a serial ATA hard drive in the system, so I'm going to be using this cable for the drive. And this is very simple, simply a point-to-point connection between the drive and the motherboard. No jumpers necessary to change on the drive. For the optical drive, I'm going to use this parallel ribbon cable because the optical drive is parallel ATA. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug it into the black connector on this cable because that is the connection for the master. The blue connector here goes into the motherboard. And if I ever add another parallel drive, I'll use this gray connector. That's the slave connection. Now the drive must be pre-jumpered for cable select, and this drive is. Most drives come from the factory that way with the cable select jumpering. Again, the odd colored stripe, in this case it's a blue stripe, goes towards pin 1, and pin 1 will almost always be oriented towards the power connector on the drive, and in this case it is up. So now I'm going to continue by plugging in these drives. First I'll start with the top drive here. Now these cables are normally keyed, which means that they won't go in if you're installing them upside down. Simply line it up and push it in place. The other end will then plug into the motherboard. Now what I'm going to do first is plug all the cables into the drives and then attach them to the motherboard. Next is the floppy cable. And then finally the serial ATA cable to the drive. Okay, once all of those cables are plugged in, I'm now going to plug them into the motherboard. Serial ATA is the easiest, and there are two connectors. I'm going to plug it into the serial ATA 0 connector on the motherboard. Next, I'll plug the floppy connector in. And orient it towards the proper orientation for pin 1. In this case, the stripe is to the bottom of the chassis. And then lastly, the parallel ATA ribbon cable, which will go in the primary IDE connector on the motherboard. Like so. Okay, now all of the drives are plugged in, all the cable connections are made, and now I can proceed by installing the power supply.